California can't tell you where $24 billion went. I can show you who it went to. Here's the number that should stop you. Over 5 years, California spent nearly $24 billion to end homelessness. At the end of those 5 years, homelessness was up 53%. That's not a slow program. That's the opposite result. So follow me, and let's open the books. I want to be careful here, because this is not a story about money disappearing. Not $1 vanished into thin air. Every dollar landed somewhere, in someone's account, on someone's pay stub. The real question isn't where the money went, it's who was on the other side of the transfer. And once you see that, the 53% stops looking like failure. Start with the auditor. In April 2024, the California State Auditor released Report 2023-102.1. It is a public document. Anyone can read it, and it found something almost hard to believe. The state agency in charge of homelessness stopped tracking the spending, and whether the programs even worked after 2021. Sit with that. The money kept flowing for years. The measuring stopped. In plain English, California kept writing checks while turning off the part of the machine that tells you if the checks did anything. The auditor looked at 5 major programs. It could only confirm that 2 were cost-effective. For the other 3, it said flatly that the state had not collected enough data to know. Now here is the human cost before we go further. More than 180,000 Californians were homeless in 2023. Real people in tents, in cars, on sidewalks. The spending was supposed to be for them. And of the people who entered temporary interim housing, only about 13% reached a permanent place to live. 44% went back to the street. 13% in, 44% back out. That is the engine of this entire story, and I need you to hold those 2 numbers because everything I show you next runs on them. So, what's the obvious answer? Spend more, build more units. That's what everyone said, including me when I started. Let's test it. Let's follow the construction money and see if just build holds up. In Los Angeles, voters passed a bond called Proposition HHH to build supportive housing. The city's own audit looked at what the units actually cost. Some came in as high as $837,000 per unit. Some projects approached $1 million for a single apartment. Now, to be fair, that's the expensive end. A statewide program called Home Key, which converted old motels into housing, averaged closer to $144,000 per unit. That one, the auditor called likely cost-effective, so the money could be spent well. It just usually wasn't. Here's the math nobody says out loud. At $800,000 a unit, a single $1 billion houses around 1,200 people. There are 180,000 on the street. Do that division and the budget runs out long before the line does. And here's the truth most people miss. When a single apartment costs the better part of $1 million, build more stops being a solution. It becomes a faucet you can never turn off. And someone is always standing at the tap, getting paid by the gallon. That's the false path. More money into this machine doesn't shrink the problem. It feeds the machine. To see why, you have to stop looking at the buildings and start looking at who's standing between the money and the street. The state doesn't run shelters itself, it pays non-profits to. That middle layer is where the ledger gets interesting. A reporter pulled the tax filings on roughly 30 taxpayer-funded homeless non-profits in Los Angeles. In 2015, as a group, they were essentially flat. A combined net loss of about $12,000. By 2023 and 2024, those same 30 organizations reported combined revenue of more than $121 million. They went from a $12,000 loss to $121 million today, over the same years that homelessness in LA County climbed. They used to be broke, now they're an industry. Let me give you one name. So this isn't abstract. The Weingart Center. Then, a decade ago, its filings show revenue of $8,874. Now, by 2024, more than $31.7 million. Then, 8,000. Now, 31 million. That's not growth, that's a different organism. And it grew tracking the crisis, not curing it. Then, there's the pay. In 2023 alone, those 30 non-profits paid a combined $35 million to their executive suites. At Path, one of the largest, the CEO, Jennifer Hark Dietz, was compensated nearly $380,000. I'm not saying anyone here is a criminal. Most of these people believe they're helping. That's what makes this so hard to see. In plain English, you don't need bad people to get a bad system. You just need the money to reward the wrong thing. And it does, which brings us to the mechanism. Let's name it. I'm going to call this the return loop, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Here's how it turns. The money is paid for effort. Beds filled, people served, programs run. It is not paid for outcomes. People permanently housed and gone for good. Watch what that does. If you permanently house someone, they leave the system. They stop being a line item. The funding tied to them ends. But if they return to homelessness, that 44%, they come back as a new case. New intake, new service, new billing. The same person can fund the system twice. Read that again, slowly. In a system paid for effort, a person who returns is worth more than a person who's cured. Failure doesn't drain the budget. Failure refills it. That is the second-order effect almost nobody connects. We assume everyone in the system wants it to end. But the revenue says the opposite. Solve homelessness completely and you would switch off $1 billion economy. The incentive to not finish was already built into the funding. Nobody had to be corrupt. The math did the work. And here's the timeless part, the line I want you to keep. When you pay for effort, you buy more effort. When you pay for outcomes, you buy outcomes. California bought exactly what it ordered. For a long time, this was just an audit, a document, easy to ignore, but that changed. On June 11th, 2026, the federal government, HUD, suspended homeless funding to LAHSA, the Los Angeles agency at the center of all this. Their words, not mine, a clear pattern of fraud. And the numbers behind that decision are staggering. A 2024 audit found roughly $513 million sitting unspent, while encampments grew outside, money appropriated to house people, never deployed. The same audit found LA's top homelessness official had signed a $2.1 million contract with her husband's employer, a conflict of interest written into the books. Now layer in one more number because it's the whole story in a single line. LAHSA's budget in 2014 was about $63 million. By 2024, it was roughly $875 million, $63 million to $875 million in 10 years. The agency grew 14 times larger. The crisis it was built to solve grew with it. So here's the question I can't fully answer, and I won't pretend to. Can this even be fixed, or was it designed not to be? Because look at what fixing it would require. You'd have to pay for outcomes, not effort. You'd have to make the money stop when someone is housed for good, which means making the money stop for the people who currently depend on it, never stopping. You would be asking an industry to vote itself smaller, to turn solving the problem into the thing that ends its own funding. The HUD suspension is the first real test. There's a 30-day hearing window. LAHSA can appeal. The money could be clawed back and restructured, or it could be quietly restored, and the loop keeps turning. I genuinely don't know which way it goes, neither does anyone honest, but for the first time, the question is on the table in public. So, where did California's $24 billion go? It went into interim housing that returned 44% of people to the street. It went into units that cost up to $837,000 apiece. It went into a contractor layer whose revenue went from a $12,000 loss to $121 million. It went into executive suites that took home $35 million in a single year. It didn't vanish, it was transferred. And the genius of the system is that the transfer keeps happening as long as the problem does. The money was never really aimed at ending homelessness. It was aimed at responding to it, and a response, unlike a solution, never has to finish. California stopped counting in 2021. Maybe that's the most honest thing the system ever did, because if you're funding effort instead of outcomes, the outcome is the one number you can't afford to look at. If this changed how you see where public money actually goes, subscribe and watch the next video. We follow the money on the systems nobody wants audited, and we don't stop counting.